Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another PlateUp Learning the Basics food card tutorial. In this episode, we're going to be talking about pies, all about pies. Pies are a unique dish because it requires multiple steps, and you get one pie and one pie per person. You can't cut it up like a pizza pie to serve multiple people. Now, all the pies, there are three different types of pie, plus the apple pie, which is the fourth kind. You see the description above where it says raw pie crust. For all the pies, you have to do that step first before you add the ingredients. But making pie crust is pretty simple. You grab flour, you put it on any sort of cutting surface, which would be a counter, a workstation, or a mixer. Or you could also use a rolling pin, which speeds it up quite fast to make the pie crust. Now, you take the flour, you put it on the surface, you interact with it 2 times to make the pie crust. Now, the tip with pies, if you pick the flour up and you take it over to a sink and you interact with it, not the pick up, put down, the interact button, it turns it automatically into the dough ball, and then you only have to knead it 1 time. Now, if you're using something like a mixer to automate it, it'll do both steps together. It'll make the first one into the dough ball, and then it'll make the second one into the actual pie crust. Now, once you have the pie crust made, you go to the meat refrigerator, because your main pies are meat pies. There's no just no filling. Meat pie is the generic beginner pie. So you basically take the meat out, you put it into the pie crust, you then put it on a cooking surface. You could use the starter hobs, you could use a regular hob, safety hob, danger hob, microwave, oven, or a heated mixer, which I would not recommend because heated mixers are incredibly slow. But if you think about it, you could put raw flour onto a mixer. It'll make it to the dough ball, it'll make it to the crust, and it'll cook the crust itself, because you can what's considered blind baking the crust ahead of time, which will save in the cooking process when you actually put the filling inside of it. Once that's done, you then put it on your cooking surface. As I mentioned, you plate it and you serve it. Pretty straightforward. Now, there is automation for pies that can be done by basically having a grabber pulling flour into a mixer. That's the most basic way to get a raw pie crust, and the easiest way to set up. You need one grabber and you need a mixer. Now, for me, a mixer would be one of the first things I would get, regardless if I have a grabber or not, because while you're kneading one yourself, the mixer could be making a second one, so you always have 2 ready to go. All right, the first card, one of the cards that you can get is mushroom pie. It's very simple. You make the pie crust, as I showed you in the previous slide. You chop a mushroom, put the mushroom in the pie, you cook it again on any sort of cooking appliance, you plate it, and you serve it. Quite simple. You could use a counter, a workstation, a sharp knife, or a mixer to chop the mushroom. Next one is vegetable pies. Now, vegetable pies is a very common card to get. Reduces 15%. The mushrooms also reduce 15% group wise. Now, vegetable pies are very much the same as meat pies. You make the initial crust. You could blind bake it, which means there's no filling if you have it set up for automation, or you can just do it raw. And the way that the carrot and the broccoli work is you don't actually chop them before you put them into the pie crust. You take each individual one and you place it into the pie crust by placing it, or if you have it in your hand, the pie crust, you walk over to each bin, you interact with each bin, it automatically put a whole carrot and a whole broccoli, which sounds a bit crazy, into the pie, but you don't need to chop them. Again, you place on any sort of cooking device, cooking appliance, it'll cook it, you plate it, and you serve it. Quite easy. This adds another step because it's with meat, it's one thing, meat, but here it's broccoli and carrot. It's not one or the other, it's both for the vegetable pie. Now, the next one is a dessert card specific for pies. Now, the issue with apple pies, why it's more difficult, is because you have to bake the crust first. You know, I said before in this previous slide how you could blind bake the crust before you add the ingredients. With apple pie, you must do that, because you cannot put a chopped apple into a raw crust. It will not work. It won't allow you to do it. So that's the only kicker with taking apple pies. 15% reduction. It only adds one extra step, really, because you're taking an apple, you're chopping it. Again, you could automate that using a mixer. And then you have to take the raw apple and put it into the cooked pie crust, which will then cook it again into the actual apple pie. So this one is automated, but again, it's a bit tricky because you have to deal with the apples. Now, my tip with pies is to automate making the raw pie crust first and have them going into a prep station. If you have the appliances where you could do it quickly, blind bake, which means baking the crust without any filling, and having them go into a prep station. So when you grab one and put whatever filling goes into it, you could use the broccoli, carrot, the meat, or the apple. It's all the same, and it cooks that much faster instead of having it go through essentially 2 cooking cycles. Even though it's only shown on one cooking time bar, it takes twice as long to do one from raw than it does from with a ready-made shell. The pies are pretty good. You do need a lot of space because you have the flour, you have the bins, so you end up having needing a lot more space for the for pies, and they do take a bit of extra time compared to something like a hamburger or a hot dog. So you have to factor that in too, as far as your automation, or if you're playing with more than 1 or 2 people, have one person making the pie crust, one person making the finished pies, and the other person could be doing serving and dish cleaning, or something like that. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Stay tuned for another PlateUp Learning the Basics food card tutorial